Most Americans who have been around the sun a few times will recognize this tradition. A sitting US president sparing a big bird from getting the chop around the fourth Thursday of every November.
We wish you well.
But it turns out that while the bizarre act of sparing a turkey at the White House is nothing new, the tradition of pardoning one every year is. And it may not have even come about if it wasn't for one of the most corrupt White House scandals of all time. This story takes us to well, a lot of years. Thanksgiving is a national holiday that takes place on the fourth Thursday of every November, at least in the United States. It's a time set officially aside to spend with family and or friends, to eat a gut-busting amount of comfort food, and to conveniently push away thoughts of genocide while crafting game plans for what retail stores would be best to vandalize in the coming 24 hours. And while I could certainly go on about the somewhat contested history of the Thanksgiving holiday itself, that's not why we're here. We're here to talk about this guy. The customary Thanksgiving turkey that's tragically more commonly recognized when dead. It might come as a surprise to some, but the tradition of serving turkey on Thanksgiving didn't necessarily start with the purported first celebration in 1621. And Thanksgiving itself didn't even become a national holiday until Abraham Lincoln issued Presidential Proclamation 106 in 1863, designating the last Thursday of November next as a day of thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens. But in the time between the original colonial celebration and Lincoln's proclamation, the turkey had grown to become feasters' carcass of choice. The tradition of presenting a turkey to the President of the United States began rather informally, with private citizens donating them to the president each year after Lincoln's proclamation in 1863. That is until 1873, when Rhode Island-based turkey farmer Horace Vose became the White House's top turkey donor, presenting a fully dressed turkey to the president every year on Thanksgiving until his death in 1913. With Vose's death came a vacuum of poultry power, and a bunch of farmers sent in their birds each year in an attempt to become the president's next top turkey benefactor. In 1920, the Cuero, Texas Chamber of Commerce provided the first live turkey donation to then-President Woodrow Wilson. They even sent it in a White House-shaped crate. But this was still long before the turkey pardon got popularized, so it got chopped and chewed. When Calvin Coolidge became president in 1923, he was overwhelmed with the number of birds that were being sent to the White House each year, and he wanted to just put a stop to it. However, a couple years later, in 1925, he caved after people had begun just sending him any animal to eat, basically. And in 1926, one of the animals that he was sent with the intention of eating was a raccoon, which Coolidge & Co. refused to eat, instead christening it Rebecca and keeping it as a White House pet. While many turkeys were presented to the president each year, the tradition wasn't officialized until 1947 under then US President Harry S. Truman. However, the motivations were less about upholding tradition and more about promoting a campaign he just launched to encourage voluntary meatless Tuesdays and poultryless Thursdays. He created the campaign in an attempt to save grain for foreign aid following World War II. Unsurprisingly, an ask by the federal government to stop eating meat on certain days did not go over well with the American public, and it especially upset the pocketbooks of the poultry and egg industry. So Truman reneged on the poultryless Thursdays, turning them into eggless Thursdays in an attempt to limit the hit to corporate coffers. And you'd think that with his pushing of poultryless Thursdays and the fact that Thanksgiving falls on a Thursday every year, that he would have spared the turkey that was donated that year. And some credit him with having unofficially pardoned that year's turkey. But that's actually not the case. He ate it anyway. So we've heard all this talk about eating turkey over the last 300 years and the turkeys that have been donated to presidents, but we've yet to see an official pardon. Turns out that the story of the first turkey pardoning is a little murky. So much so that even a relatively recent US president got it wrong. As poultry pardonings go, Abraham Lincoln is credited with the first unofficial sparing of a gifted turkey as a result of his son Tad becoming attached to the bird. However, this was a turkey meant for Christmas time, so it doesn't count as a Thanksgiving turkey or a pardon. And as I mentioned before, Truman is sometimes credited with having provided the first pardon, but that's not entirely true. But that didn't stop Bill Clinton from repeating that claim in 1997.
President Truman was the first president to pardon a turkey.
The first time that a Thanksgiving turkey was publicly spared during an official turkey presentation was on November 19, 1963, by then US President John F. Kennedy. In response to the sign hung around the presented turkey's neck that said, "Good eating, Mr. President," Kennedy said, "We'll let this one grow," and sent the turkey back to the farm. However, it's important to note that he did not use the term pardon, and simply just stated that they would not be eating this one. And as fate would have it, The turkey that Kennedy sent back to the farm would outlive Kennedy himself, as he was assassinated only 3 days later. Following Kennedy's unofficial pardon, some later US presidents would also spare turkeys in their tenure. Richard Nixon is reported to have spared some of the turkeys, as well as Jimmy Carter, who had the turkeys sent to a petting zoo without any public presentations. Following Carter, Ronald Reagan also spared the turkeys and sent them to a petting zoo during his tenure. But the term pardon was still not in use by any president in relation to turkeys. That is, until 1987 rolled around. On November 23, 1987, during the turkey presentation, Ronald Reagan was asked a question by a reporter on whether he intended to pardon Oliver North and John Poindexter for their roles in the Iran-Contra affair. If you don't know what Iran-Contra is, it's definitely worth diving into, but for the sake of keeping this video under like 3 hours, it was an extremely corrupt mess in which Reagan secretly and illegally sold weapons to Iran in order to secretly and very illegally fund a group called the Contras, who were fighting against the Nicaraguan socialist government. It was Reagan's biggest and most illegal international no-no. And I think the clip can sum this up a lot better than I can, so with that in mind, take a listen to the exchange between Reagan and reporters during the 1987 turkey presentation.
You can say Happy Thanksgiving right in front of him, and it doesn't matter.
Are you going to pardon North and Poindexter, sir?
What?
Are you going to pardon North and Poindexter?
Sam, that's a question no one can answer at this point. I'm not going to
You
try.
can, sir.
No, I can't.
Well, what has to happen, Mr.
If they'd
President?
have given me a different answer on Charlie, his future, I would have pardoned him.
Mr. President, do you intend to pardon them on Thanksgiving Day?
Him? No. There's no answer to that. I'm not answering that at all, and no one can.
While Reagan intended to spare the turkey regardless, that was the first time that a sitting US president used the term pardon in relation to the Thanksgiving turkey, and it was done purely to deflect questions from reporters regarding a massive scandal that Reagan was actively embroiled in. This whole thing just makes me giggle. And when George H.W. Bush took office in 1989, he made the presidential pardoning of the Thanksgiving turkey a tradition.
But let me assure you and this fine Tom turkey that he will not end up on anyone's dinner table, not this guy. He's granted a presidential pardon as of right now, and allow him to live out his days on a children's farm, not far from here.
Each year since 1989, the sitting US president has provided a presidential pardon for the Thanksgiving turkey, and they even started to get official names toward the end of Bill Clinton's presidency in 1999. They've also become an important enough component of the ceremony to receive named understudies.
Peanut butter and jelly.
But I do find myself wondering if any of those pardoned turkeys over the years, from Harry to Jerry to peanut butter and jelly, ever think to themselves, what would have happened to him if Ronald Reagan hadn't been such a corrupt piece of shit?